Like for me, boobs. Like I'm not really. I mean, boobs are okay, but like when I see a fat girl, right, and she is like, showing her boobs, I can't. I'm just like, you know that kind of feeling where you just can't help but like trying not to look. There's like this kind of like unintentional force that's like making you like just stare, right? And then you're just wondering how are they that big, right?
By
All
the way,
right.
I was serious in the comment I made earlier about trying to learn more about whatever the debacle is between you and Speed.
The problem is that the debacle is um,
Don't
not so
misrepresent
simple
it.
to understand. It's not so simple to understand because let me just tell you the really depressing thing is that
Oh boy.
the most fundamental objection, or at least the normal course um, of reply, has not even been said yet, and um, because there's a normal response, right? Something like, well, we can just understand, you know, I think Drake
Shooting
is kind of
coke. What are you doing? What?
I
Trying to
think
blow
Drayce
us
has
out?
kind of said it, but like the normal course of action is to say that normativity is reducible to non-normative facts, right? Um, and then there's a whole paradox that arises from that called the rule following paradox, and I haven't even gone over it. And so it's just not even on the. It's not even the debacle's over like non-serious replies at the moment.
So are
There are
you
replies.
so are you trying to like distinguish between like the natural world, like chemistry and physics, and like intelligent things that are non-natural? Is that kind of the distinction?
Well, I think intelligence implies so.
Or the
Yeah, essentially,
results
yes.
like
But you're not
intelligent
saying
design?
anything false. Yeah, you're not saying anything false. The point is that I think something like intentionality is normative, um, whereas something like a natural state is not normative. Um, like,
I don't know what that means.
Normative
uh,
means based on a norm or a standard, establishing some norm or standard, or
Oh,
being
okay.
yeah.
established by some norm or standard.
Anything that you could put in terms of ought or should is going to be
Okay.
normative.
Okay.
So, like, the idea is that okay, if you accept Hume's distinction, which I understand there's someone in the room that doesn't, that's why I'm going to put it in the if form. If you do, if you understand X as being like, if you could derive ought from X, that means X has to have an ought, right?
Right.
And so the point is that I think you can derive an ought from a desire. So therefore, desires are oughts. I think that's the gist. Uh, Same with belief. Beliefs are a little bit more tricky, but desires are more obvious. Where like, if you're anything like a moral relativist, you're going to understand that part of what it means to say one should do something is to be understood in terms of what they want or what they desire, what they intend. So, and that fits very comfortably only because a desire and intention is itself contains the concept of ought, right? Um, and the idea is that when we're doing science or some kind of other empirical venture, we're getting descriptive states. We're so like they are bleeding. Well, where's the ought in there? It's not there. So if I said it's it bleeding is wrong, or it ought not happen that they bleed, and I say that logically comes from the sort of descriptive state that they are bleeding, that's where the logical the kind of what GE more calls the naturalistic fallacy kind of occurs, that you're equating some kind of ought to an is.
Well, is it a different usage if you say you ought to bleed if you cut someone's veins?
Sorry, what?
Is it a different usage of the word if you say they ought to bleed if you cut them in the artery?
Well, the point is that if you cut them in the artery, you can't understand whether that should or shouldn't happen from just that fact.
Well, yeah, it's like fluid physics.
Yeah, it's just not. It's nothing. Um, Nothing normative comes from that fact. Now, if someone says that shouldn't happen, there's a way to make that intelligible, but they're going to have to appeal to a standard that one recognizes, right? So that ought not happen because I desire it not to happen. Well, that makes sense because ought is built into the concept of desire, but it's not built into the concept of that artery being cut.
But couldn't you say the product of 2 and 2 ought to be 4?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think I would say that we have to be careful not to equivocate. Something like if you believe that 2 plus 2, if you are looking at some sort of what is the expression, mathematical expression like 2 plus 2, you ought to think that it's 4. That's one understanding of what you said. But you see, you could fail. You could think it's 5. Okay? But what it means to say that 2 plus 2 equals 4, or 2 plus 2 ought equal 4 outside of the purview of belief, that I have to wonder what that means. And I think it's I think it's just, I think it is 4, right? I don't think it ought be 4. I think it is 4, right?
Well, I think those are related. So to me, what an ought means is what you're really saying is that's correct.
Well, but correctness, I think, it is understood in terms of our commitments, our desires and beliefs. I don't think there's correctness out in the world, right?
Well,
it's
just
Oh,
corresponds
I've
to
heard
truth.
this discussion like 6 times now.
Have you?
Yeah, you must be getting really tired of it.
No, it's fine. Keep going.
But I haven't talked to Snake with it.
No, you haven't.
Yeah. I have a
Do you mean-
job
I will
I have
say
to
real
work
quick-
at during the day.
Well, but
I'll
Somebody
say
was
real
gonna-
quick that sorry.
no, go ahead, Drayce.
Snake, I did heard. I think I still got some lag going on too. So sorry if I end up like cutting in on people and stuff. I'll just, the second I notice that somebody's talking, I'll stop. But I just wanted to say real quick to Snake that I did respond to your response to me today on that comments thread. It's just that in my response, I said that I think Kant sucks big floppy donkey dick, and YouTube deleted my comment. So-
Yeah, that'll do it. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Kant either.
I will say, I've
Really?
heard
I mean,
a lot of
Kant is like
different-
amazing to me, but
Okay.
he's like, I'm sorry, Leo.
I was gonna say I've heard that his 3 critiques are good books to read. I want to read them.
Well, if that's the measure of goodness, then he's horrible.
I mean,
I'm
I
just
started
saying,
off
I've been-
not liking him, and then there were a few things I liked, and then there were some other things that I kept reading. I don't know. I'm mixed on Kant.
I think that you see, I thought I would hate Nietzsche, and then I did a big study on Nietzsche last year on his ethics.
Yeah,
And
I
while
like
most
Nietzsche.
of it was incoherent, there were these big golden nuggets that I learned and even employ now. But I mean, I think that there's always nuance to these views, and if you dedicate a little bit of like time to them, you get past the sort of cursory understanding that people give you, and then. But yeah, I think Kant. There's a lot of interesting. Sure, they might be false, and Kant might be washed up philosophically, but they're like, wow, like that's pretty genius to think about that. I totally disagree, but what an interesting turn or move there.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with you very much that when you really start to read the people directly, that you get a better understanding. What I would stress about Nietzsche, though, I do that all the time. I always say it with American slang. Americans say Nietzsche, but it's supposed to be Nietzsche, and I'm trying to kick that in the bud.
What
But
have I been saying? What have I?
I've heard neither of those.
What?
I've heard it's Nietzsche.
Nietzsche? I think I say all sorts of weird stuff with that name.
It's more of a sh than a ch.
Heard, yeah, I've heard a bunch of different pronunciations, but I've heard people repeatedly tell me that I should say Nietzsche rather than Nietzsche, so that's what I've been trying to do. But what I'll say about him is that he's somebody who you have to, and Kant would probably be another example of this, just because of how much of a convoluted writer Kant can be. But with Nietzsche, it is not a matter of convolution; it's a matter of that he loves metaphors and he loves using particular words and very in certain ways where if you just take it at face value, you won't understand what the hell he's saying, because sometimes he's responding to debates that are like 2,000 years old, and he's responding in the context from 2,000 years ago and using the word in that sense. Whereas if you were to take like a modern understanding of the word, you'd have no idea what the hell he's talking about. One big example of that is how he talks about truth a lot of the time, and people start having all sorts of crazy ideas about what he's talking about truth, that there is no truth and that we can never know the truth or anything like that. And no, he's not saying any of that shit. So you just have to understand when he talks about truth, for instance, he's talking about a kind of eternalism inherent in things. He's talking about this, like basically what we would understand today as like Plato's kind of essentialism, where things have this like static nature to them and stuff like that. When he's critiquing truth, he's critiquing a kind of essentialism, and many people just don't understand that at all. And so they start thinking of, yeah.
He was a big fan of Heraclitus. I don't know. Did you read anything about that?
Oh, yeah. He talks about Heraclitus very approvingly. The thing I'll say about Nietzsche, though, for anybody who's interested in him, besides the fact that you'll have to read him several times before you truly understand what the hell it is that he's trying to say, when you do understand, you'll realize that there's very little incoherence. He has a very consistent framework. He has some bad ideas. A really bad idea he has is he endorses basically the state practice of eugenics. I think that's disgusting. But as far as it goes, like, he has a very consistent framework that you'll uncover once you understand the way that he's using certain words. It's just that you need to know that if you do end up liking Nietzsche, the situation that you'll end up in is basically like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Vampire in Brooklyn with Eddie Murphy. He gets up there on the stage and he gives a sermon. Evil is good. And that is where you end up with Nietzsche. If you have any commonality at all with the idea of like a concern for like a sense of compassion for the weak or the destitute or things like that, there's no way in hell that you'll ever be able to approve of a Nietzschean ethic. To give a direct quote, the weak and the botched shall perish. This is the first principle of our charity.
Boy.
I understand it more as he's actually describing instead of prescribing with the master-slave morality.
Well, he is describing the way that various people, think. Like, there are certain people who are capable of taking on, a more. There are stronger people with more vital spirits who are, able to accept certain ideas because they can stand them. Whereas certain people with a weaker constitution, if they would come to believe in those things, it would utterly destroy them, which is why they can't possibly accept it. But he is nevertheless ultimately siding with those who endorse the pro-strong rather than the concern for weak kind of thing. And the way that he does that is many people interpret him as this like nihilist, which is totally fucking wrong. Like, people like Jordan Peterson, people like Rabbi Zacharias or William Lane Craig who talk about Nietzsche, they completely and utterly distort every word out of that man's mouth, because they suggest that he's ultimately a nihilist and you end up in nihilism town if you go down Nietzsche's road. The whole point for Nietzsche is getting beyond nihilism, because you when God dies, you end up in nihilism because all of your previous values were founded upon your religion. And so now all of that has collapsed and you have nothing. Nietzsche's major project is, how can we get beyond the nothing? How can we develop a renewed sense of life. And that is his major project. And his solution to this is his whole thing about the will to power.
Yeah, I mean, I did that. The whole will to power concept is like incompatible with nihilism. Like, why bother having will to anything if you're truly a nihilist?
Yeah, and like absolute friggin' blowtards like Stefan Molyneux. I don't know whether or not. All right, so that asshole, that he's such a fucking moron. He'll
That's
say,
an understatement. He's a troglodyte.
He'll draw an equivalence relation, and I apologize, Snake. I mean, I know that you're more of a libertarian bent, so you might look at Stefan Molyneux as somebody who's interesting. And I mean, I too, I'm not a libertarian, but there are certain things that you and I share in common. I have a family resemblance to many different ideologies. I know we've been going on for quite some time here, gentlemen, but at the same time, I wonder if you guys have some further topics to explore. I'm up for it. In addition, if you guys have the energy, I'd like to put the metaethics issue back on the table since both of you are interested in it. But if you have anything else that's on your mind, I'm all ears on that one too.
You go. You could start it off.
Before I do, Snake, it looked like you were about to say something. What was on your mind?
No, I was just gonna say both of you, we had stuff to discuss and similar topics, I guess.
Oh yeah,
Sure.
we were all in the comment section, right?
Yeah.
We were on the okay. Do you want to bring up those right now, like those specific concerns?
Yeah.
Or not?
Or
Yeah, we can start there. Now this is a slight tangent, but it's something that me and Snake were talking about earlier, which is how to understand intrinsic value. Snake was talking about the fact that the properties of the valued thing are intrinsic to that thing, and there's absolutely no disagreement there. I totally grant that the properties of the valued thing are intrinsic to that thing, but the way that Kant and Mackey and other people are talking about this idea of intrinsic value is rather not to talk about the properties being intrinsic. They're suggesting that the value itself is intrinsic, that you can have a value without any relation to any valuer at all. Even if every living being was annihilated, some particular object can still inherently have value. And that's why I'm critical of that notion of intrinsic value, because I think value emerges as a relationship between something that's alive and certain objects that help it in its experience of life and its pursuit of survival. That's where I think value ultimately emerges from. But in terms of understanding intrinsic value in the Aristotelian sense, where you're just talking about a non-derivative value, something that, you follow this chain of, okay, well, why is that valuable? And why is that valuable? And why is that valuable? Eventually you'll get to the end of a chain where there's a value that isn't, that you can't go any further down the line on a chain. It's the end of it. That notion of intrinsic value, I don't have a problem with. But this idea that you can have something in a vacuum that has no relationship to anything at all whatsoever, and yet say that it is valuable, even though there's no utility, there's no nothing, it's just the object itself, and somehow it has value. I'm critical of that notion, so I wanted to put that on the table.
yeah, I'm
Well,
not.
I'd say value. Go ahead, Snake. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wouldn't really know what that means. I think that there's like some intrinsic good, like a thing. Its existence is good, but as far as like a candle or I don't know, any random object has like value in that Kantian sense. Like I wouldn't really know what that means, but like the way that I look at it is like why do people or valuers, why do they value certain objects? And it can come down to an objective fact about that object, which is what it can do for that person.
Yes, absolutely. There's no disagreement there. Me and you are on the same page on that one. And I'll just finish this by saying that I don't think Kant knew what the fuck he was talking about when he was talking about this notion of intrinsic value. I don't think that this notion of intrinsic value makes any sense whatsoever. I think that instead, it's kind of like it has certain like supernaturalist connotations to it, where like you can talk about, like these eternalist or essentialist elements, these kinds of like, permanent floating objects in the sky, so to speak, where like, where they always persist and they're always in themselves. And it's just like you could put them in a pure vacuum and they'll always have the qualities that they have. And it's all just, inherent to them. And this kind of notion makes absolutely no sense to me. And I don't think that ultimately it's meaningful at the end of the day. I think it divorces the notion of value from where it truly comes from.
Yeah, I think it's more of an emergent phenomenon where it's relationship to other things. Or
Yes, I agree
It's
with that.
interactions.
Well, I think that value, if you think of it, let's just use the terminology. Let's just think of it as a universal. So it's like redness is a universal. We don't. There's no like redness. That doesn't imply an instantiation of red. But the idea that when it's instantiated, we call that a property. So there's like redness, and then there's the property of red. That's to say, as some object as being red. And I think that's the way I understand value. That it's a kind of universal that's distinguished from normal ontological categories that, like physical. I don't think that it would make sense to say that that kind of property is a physical property if it's understood in terms of some kind of demand or prescription. Because I don't really, like if I say, let's say like take a cake, this is the standard example where you and I can agree on all the physical facts about the cake. We can agree about its chemical makeup, its density, length, I don't know, whatever color. We can agree on all the physical properties, but you might find it desirable and I might not. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that it's either then that I know some physical fact that you don't, right? But it seems like if we can establish that we agree, if we make it together and study the chemical composition, it seems like we do agree on all the physical facts.
But sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but
I don't mind being cut off.
Yeah, you say that. I like that. I also want people to cut me off if they want to clarify and stuff. But what so I think even if you don't desire the cake, you can still know that it has value. Like if you can sell the cake, you don't want to eat the cake, but someone else wants it. So that
yeah. So there's like interesting issues that arise. That one, right? Well, but you could. I think what we're saying there is that you understand that it has desirability or value to someone else, but not to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's like also the weirdest kind of value might be something like aspiration. Like a lot of people don't listen to classical music, but they aspire to value it, or just right. They want to see its value, but that's kind of paradoxical because they understand that it has a value, but they don't see it. So that's
because they listen to Tchaikovsky.
I love Tchaikovsky. I listen to Tchaikovsky every day, actually. But yeah, the Rococo cello piece.
Yeah, I think that's recognizing the value of it, but personally, you just don't like it.
Yeah, but do you? Yeah, there's like an interesting distinction between liking something, I think, or even preferring something and desiring it.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea, the latter, like if you like something, there's some kind of like affinity for it, like a kind of being drawn into it. And I think I want to distinguish that from a desire, unless that's what. But the the idea here is, though, that what it means to say that you desire X is to have the belief that X is desirable. I don't think it makes sense to say that you desire X and also believe that X is not desirable. So
I just like, what about examples where people believe that something isn't desirable or shouldn't be desirable, and yet nevertheless, to their own consternation, they still desire it?
well, then you can always have competing desires. You can always there's like resentment. You can have resentment towards yourself. Like when I was a Christian, I held resentment towards myself, and but I had a competing desire. I wanted to be in conformity. I saw value in being in conformity with what I took to be Christianity. So there's competing desires, and that can cause tension. Now, where it gets really, go ahead. I was going to finish if you wanted. Yeah, no.
I have something to throw in, but you finish first before I do.
Yeah, I think the weird thing is when we say you ought not desire something, that's where I start to lose a lot of realist, right? Because let's say you see value in eating a baby, like there's a kind of a desirability to that. And obviously I have, there's disvalue, right? The idea that, like, you know, when you smell something, there can be like, that could be a motivation to like get away from it, or there's disvalue in the sense that, like, if you want to eat a baby, I'm going to stop you. So when people say you ought not desire that, that's to say they ought not believe that it's desirable, but it's motivating them nonetheless. So it doesn't really make that much sense. So what's going on there? It's hard to know. I think it's a psychological, like, kind of, there's baggage from, philosophical, cultural baggage from like various institutional norms, like religious norms, right? So they might be saying something like that's out of conformity with God's will. We're just going to call that fair or good. And then that language kind of carries over to secular societies without kind of that realization. Or the philosophical response might be that if it's a perceptual thing, if you can see desirability, well, then you can misperceive, which is very strange. But I think that that's probably the best account, that if you look at a human being and you don't see a motivation to help it, someone might be saying, well, you're misperceiving. You're not seeing the value that's there. And I think that's where the conversation stops. You kind of just shrug and say, well, I don't think I'm misperceiving. And there's no further philosophical discourse. And I'm fine with that, because I think that's how perception works anyways. Like, if I see a tree and you don't, and you're like, you're misperceiving. And let's say, so I say, I claim to see the tree, you don't see the tree. And you're like, well, why don't you go and get closer to it, make sure it's not an illusion. I get closer to it and I actually can, have all these experiential sensations and whatnot of the tree, and you do the same thing, but you don't get any of that. There's not going to be a good arbitrator of like who's perceiving or misperceiving there. I know that never really happens. Typically, when you get close to what you take to be illusion, you might be grabbing air, but in principle, you could have those sensations, right? And I think that that's how it's going to be with respect to value, that people could just be misperceiving value, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I think what an ought means is what you're saying. It either means like I like that, but essentially, even if you're just saying I like that or I desire that, you're kind of saying, well, that's a good thing or that's a correct thing, and you can kind of remove that subjectivity from it, and like with the mathematics example, if you're saying you ought to conclude this from this equation, you're saying that this is the correct way to do things. So but I guess that goes. Drayce, did you want to say something before I respond to Snake?
There are some points that I had to bring up, but and including what you and Snake just had to say. But I'm going to get behind you in line one more time before I do so. So go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, Snake. So when you say 2 + 2 ought equal 4, I guess for me the concept of ought leaves an open question about what could happen, right? Like it's like think about, you can think of this in terms of belief too, right? Like if I think that 2 + 2 = 4, does that make it true? No, it doesn't. That the idea of the truth conditions of 2 + 2 = 4 is going to be mind independent. So the idea of thinking or thoughts or desiring is it leaves the open question of whether it's right or wrong. It doesn't establish the sort of truth conditions for that thing, right?
Well, I
or
guess
whether
you
that thing is
could,
happening.
like, if you replace every time you say the word ought, you just say is correct. I think that none of the meaning there has actually changed. I think you haven't lost any. It's not lost in translation. It's all the same.
I somewhat agree, but correct. There are different kinds of oughts, right? Like when we say 2 + 2 = 4 is correct, we're not saying something about a moral, there's no moral dimension to it, right? So there are different kinds of oughts.
Yeah. Well, I think
And so
I think the moral dimension comes in where like agents are making choices, like a rock can't really be moral because it's
action.
It's just gonna always do what it does. It can't choose two different paths.
Yeah.
That was that the point about 2 + 2 ought equal 4 not being an ought in the moral sense was one of the things that I was going to bring up too. But yeah, I mean, like, but I sympathize with what Snake is saying in terms of, like, you know, if you just replace ought with correct, that you haven't lost any meaning. It's just that at the same time, like, there's different kinds of ought, and there's also different kinds of correct, in the sense that, like, is it morally correct? Is it arithmetically correct? Is it historically correct, or whatever? You know, there are different kinds, and so I would just say that, you know, it's important to point out the particular kind of correct or ought that you're talking about when you discuss it. With respect to Danny, what you were saying about classical music, a lot of what you said there actually describes how I got into classical music, because at first I didn't like classical music at all. But because I was convinced that there had to be some value to this, because so many people had, you know, kind of considered it to be, like, you know, the pinnacle of culture, that I forced myself to listen to a lot more of it, because I was convinced that there had to be some kind of value with respect to it. Now, as a matter of fact, over the course of time, I had to admit to myself that I think that a ton of classical music actually sucks. You know, like, as far as I'm concerned, like, I never want to listen to Handel ever again, but I'll listen to Beethoven or I'll listen to Mozart. And so it just, like, ultimately what ended up, now, if I had never found any value to the classical music, I would have ultimately had to say that my previous supposition that they were right, that this is like the pinnacle of culture and valuable music, I would have ultimately had to reject that. But I ended up legitimately liking certain pieces of classical music. And so that is what ultimately led me to stay. There was something else here. With respect to the last thing I'll put out here on the table is the distinction that you started off with, Danny, about making, like, drawing a line between liking something and desiring it. That's just, it's a little weird to me in that sense. Like, I think that, like, I would more go with what Snake was saying. I think that if you're saying that you like something, that there's something about it that you desire, that you want to have in your possession. You know, even if you're conflicted about it, like, you know, talking about, you know, your experiences with Christianity and homosexuality, you know, even if there was something that you didn't like about it, you know, whether it be Christianity or homosexuality, nevertheless, like, no matter what you could do, there was something about yourself that liked both of those things and drew you to it. There was a desire there. And so I'm skeptical about the notion that you can draw that line between saying that you like something and say you desire it. I think that one implies the other.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but I guess I'm just describing the sort of phenomena in which where you gravitate towards one thing over another, and it's like sort of independent from your intention. So like for me, boobs, like I'm not really, I mean, boobs are okay, but like I
You're
don't
an
know
ass
why,
man?
but no, I'm like, I have the weirdest sexuality in the world. But the point is that like when I see a fat girl, right, and she is like, showing her boobs, I can't. I'm just like, you know that kind of feeling where you just can't help but like trying not to look. There's like this kind of like unintentional force that's like making you like just stare, right? And then you're just wondering, how are they that big, right? Like what happened if she lost weight? Would they still be big? You're just like wondering, like there's like an affinity there, right? That's not. I shouldn't really cash out in terms of a desire, right? I don't really see anything desirable about them. I'm just sort of like gravitated towards it. And I don't think that's namely intentional, but that's not a rigorous understanding of the distinction. And I have to get back to you on that, right? Because I used to know the distinction.
Okay, because I mean, like I would say at the same time that even though you're kind of like forced to look at it because it's there and it's like shocking and it's just like, whoa, what the hell's going on and whatever. But at the same time, my question to you would be, if we're trying to draw a distinction between liking something and desiring it, when you look at the fat chick with the big boobs, do you find that you like the sight of that? Because
are you using my notion of like? Because I'm just meaning like, look, like, okay, here's one last example. The horrible things we see on TV and shows, like, the news, like, it's almost like masochistic, right? But there's like a likeness, there's like an affinity for it, right? When we watch Game of Thrones and see all the horrible things that happen, like with respect to the Starks or whatever, we think that all this stuff, we wish it's not desirable. Like it's nothing, there's no desire there, but there's like an affinity of it, like where we just can't.
Could you say it's captivating or interesting? Like would that be a good?
Captivating is better. Interesting seems to imply desire. I don't think this is gonna. I think this is just intuition pumps for the distinction. Let me get back to you on the exact philosophical meanings here, but I think I am trying to track a difference between something that you're kind of disposed to like doing with your eyes, right, versus something that's intentional. So if I distinguish like and desire, it's going to be a sort of intentional distinction, right? One is intentional, the other one isn't. But that's all I have.
Okay, I mean, like with respect to your example of watching violence, though, my critical reaction to that is that I do think that there are fundamental aspects of human nature that desire violent conduct, and that is why you find it interesting or captivating. Whether or not you like that part of yourself is a different question. But as far as I'm concerned, violence.
You just said there's a distinction right there.
But no, because the thing is that you might not like that part of yourself, but there's another part of yourself that likes it a lot.
Oh, it's like competition. It's like competition.
Yeah,
it's back to
that competition thing.
I really think I'm not. Let me get back to you on that distinction. For right now, for purposes of this conversation, we'll just use them interchangeably. But just so you know, I think there's a more nuanced understanding of like preference or liking and desire. But I'm not prepared to give the distinction.
Okay.
Well, I guess it's.
But we'll just use them interchangeably.
Like, how would you categorize like watching a train wreck? Because you don't actually want it to happen. You don't want to be in the wreck. Like, you might have some sort of primitive desire to like engage in violence, but you also desire not to harm people, and those compete. But I guess.
A real train wreck. That's the idea. That's the idea that I'm trying to capitalize. Is that you don't have the belief that it's desirable. You don't have that belief.
Well, I mean,
there's a kind of like in the words that you said exactly. You can't help yourself.
Yeah.
If you can't help yourself, it's not a choice. It's not intentional, and that's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, but at the same time, I was thinking like, you don't want it to happen, but at the same time, you want to see it, and it has to happen for you to see it. So it's, I guess you could CGI it.
Okay. All right. So I mean, like, here's the thing though, because if you're just talking about, a few, like you're literally there and you see a few people, like maybe a little child or something like that. You just got done talking to the child and he's a cool little dude, and then he starts running toward the train tracks and the train is coming and it's going to hit him. are you actually kind of thinking like, yeah, I would like to see that happen? No, I don't think you are, because you like the child and you know, you don't want to see anything bad happen to it. However,
But
if
you
you're,
kinda
you know,
do.
if so, what's that?
But you kind of do.
But I mean, perhaps somebody, as far as I'm concerned, I definitely don't want to ever see that little kid get run over by the train. However, there are certain people who I think are utter douchebags who I think nothing better could happen than them to be run over by a fucking train.
Yeah.
So as far as it goes, like, you know, it will be dependent. Like when you were talking about the trolley problem with me last time and emphasizing the importance of who's the individual that's tied to the track, I think that's very important. You know, because I don't think that the desire for violence is, you know, is blind in the sense that any violence will do to satiate this thing that exists in our nature. Rather, it's more person specific. It has to do with how they relate to us in terms of our positive or negative evaluations of such people. And in terms of insofar as we have a negative evaluation of somebody, then there will be something about us inherent in the very base of our nature that is prone toward violent conduct.
You take there to be a human nature?
I do.
Oh, okay. I can't make sense of that, but a lot of people do.
And then
there's a shit ton of literature on identifying human nature. As a matter of fact, I just read a paper about Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of needs and his discussion of human nature. But I think that you know, not a bad book to start with in defense of human nature, even though I normally don't like him very much, would be Steven Pinker has his book The Blank Slate, The Modern Denial of Human Nature.
But I don't even know what nature means in this context, but like necessary too.
Sure. So it'd be just like a set of particular characteristics that are static. They do not change, and the reason why they do not change is like Pinker talks about this as well in his book How the Mind Works. Is that there are certain aspects that run so deep within the nature of the organism that even natural selection and evolution are completely incapable of changing them. It's because of things that are basically like fundamental aspects to the nature of a living organism. And then so like you have a nature in that sense where like, what does it even mean to be a living organism? And you'll have a certain set of criteria, even if a bit fuzzy, because of, you know, trying to draw a sharp line might be very difficult. But nevertheless, you can have at least a fuzzy conception where there are certain things that most certainly make up a basis of what can be meant by a living organism, and those things won't ever change because of what it means to be a living organism.
Yeah. Well, okay. The thing is that I don't consider myself to be simply a living organism. But the idea here is that we don't want to construe nature in terms of not changing. Not simply, it can't just be that. There's got to be a necessity to it. Right?
Well, it would be necessary in the sense of like, you know, the fundamental aspect of what it is. There are, you know, nature does constantly change, but if you were to change these aspects of it, you would obliterate it. In other words, these would be necessary conditions of what we mean by this particular thing.
Well, yeah, but if we're talking about like something like personal identity, that seems to be understood in terms of the subject.
So you can have personal identity where personal identity would be much, much more open to variation because, you know, there's a high degree of individuality amongst people, you know, where like, you know, Snake might like, you know, maybe Snake hates classical music and I like it. You know, there, you know, aspects of personal identity have a wide range of variation. But in another sense, me and Snake are both humans. And this is something where, like, when you trace it down into questions of what is a living organism, you will come up with a certain static set of criteria for that. And then you can also ask the question of, like, what does it mean to be a mammal? And then what does it mean to be a primate?
Yeah, but look, you might have the body of a human, but not see yourself as a human.
Well, then you would simply be incorrect.
what are your views on transgenderism?
As far as transgenderism goes, I take a line that basically says that you can psychologically believe yourself to be gender fluid, but ultimately it's binary.
Okay, that's interesting. I rarely meet people that are like that, at least around these circles. But I mean, I think there's like a normative aspect of it. Let's just say that you can have a conception. Like, okay, have you seen Princess and the Frog?
I haven't.
Oh, what is wrong with
I
everyone?
heard you bring that up the other day. I haven't watched that movie.
Snake, I'm Matt. Snake, have you seen Princess and the Frog?
I mean, I've seen versions. I'm sure there's a ton of versions. Which one are you talking about?
The Disney version? Okay,
the Princess and the Frog. Or wait.
Yeah, the princess. Oh, what did I say?
What is it? What
the
is
Peach
the
and the Frog?
Disney movie?
It's Princess and the Frog.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've seen that one though.
They both become frogs.
Yeah.
I was too busy watching Saw Part 3.
I'm thinking of the myth of the Frog Prince.
Oh, okay. Well, when they became frogs, they didn't see themselves as frogs. I don't think they were wrong for it.
Well, that's because, I mean, like, yeah, but in that scenario, I'm imagining that since this is a Disney movie, they became frogs in some kind of magic sense, and like really, they retain their like, human,
Let's not be speed of sound here, okay? The hypotheticals to show, right, that you can accept the physical part of yourself as being, having these made of these molecules, these organs, or whatever, but not see yourself as that.
Yeah, and that's where I would stop my foot and say that you are seriously confused about your own nature, because as far as it goes, like if you are a human being in the sense that you have all of the morphological, genetic, and even like on a very deep level, psychological characteristics of a human being, but you actually feel like you're a space alien from Star Wars, I would just say that in that case, sorry, but you are woefully mistaken about
what proposition are they mistaken about?
The fact that they are not a human being.
No. Remember, I'm very careful with the language. I said they see themselves otherwise.
So the psychological aspect.
What's wrong about that?
I think psychologically, that's a huge part of identity, but you can't really separate that from the body, because that is the way that mind interacts with the world. If you're like an insect and you have the identity of a human, just to make the frog example a little more extreme, well, you can't, your identity, it doesn't matter what you identify as, you're not physically capable of like going to a stove and cooking dinner. And
yeah, they could accept that, right? They're not denying the fact that they're in that body. What they're denying is that they are that body, that's their body.
Yeah, and I think that's just delusion.
But there are
one second. Okay, are these mine?
Are those yours?
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing so. Yeah. Did you steal them from the person who just walked in the door before?
What are the sorts? Well, even if I did, what are the sorts of truth conditions for what's mine?
Basically, it would amount to. It would be a question of your possessing it, and would also be a question of like legitimate transfer, which is a huge issue in political theory. That's
legitimate.
Really
yeah, I have to forget. I forget. I'm talking to a moral realist. So, but the idea is that what constitutes legitimacy is going to be mental, in my view, right? So I could actually have stolen these and admit that they're not mine. They're my possession. But there's an open question of whether they should be in my possession, ownership.
Right? Yes, that's a legitimate transfer issue. So it's not. It would be like possession would be like one thing, and it might just be a pointer. But a person can possess something that's not legitimately theirs, and so it comes down. It does.
I don't see why that doesn't apply to the body. I don't see a distinction between this and my hand in terms of ownership.
Okay, so I mean, like with that though, you can. I mean, like it really does come down to like a real deep dive into the question of what it means to own something.
Well, exactly. I think property is an extension of your body and your actions. I think that's how you acquire it.
Yeah, sure. Like you could, but I mean, there's like we might stop ourselves and saying, look, I don't identify with this. If I were to lose it, I'm still me. Same even with my hand and my arm, right? But the point is that there could be someone in principle that looks at their body and say, this is not what I see. I don't see the self as being mine.
So I mean, like with respect to that, though, the question would then turn on, like if you could, how much of yourself, how much of your body could you erase before you start to see a major impact on your personal identity? And I think that once you start, like you could maybe lose an arm, you could lose a leg or something. But once you start, for example, taking out significant portions of your brain, as has been done in certain like surgeries where they have to remove or disconnect certain areas, and then you see a corresponding major impact on the character traits of that person, the personality character traits of the person as a result of the surgery, which is also going to like dive down.
But that could happen. That could happen in principle if you were removed one of my fingernails.
But if you lost some like physical ability that was central to your identity too, like if I don't know if you're an ice skater and you get paralyzed.
Well, then you're no longer that person. We're not even in the hypothetical anymore, right? The point is that I see, the way you see yourself, right, that's mental. We're talking about the mind, right? And if you change the world or change the body in a way where those identitarian commitments are no longer there, we're just talking about someone else. But in terms of the set of identitarian commitments, right, those commitments may not be of your body, of one's body. In fact, or they could extend that I see this room as part of myself, right? And if you damage the room, you damage me, right? So the point is that there's not a fact of the matter about who you are.
No, I definitely do. Like I have a very deep-seated disagreement with that. You can mess up the room, for example, and that might personally offend you, but has it really, hit you deep at the level of your own?
It could. I'm not that kind of person.
Not in any sense. Not in any sense other than your own emotional dispositions to that, which is basically, the fact that is what reveals it to be delusion, is the fact that the only effect that messing up your room.
You lost me. You lost me completely.
I think Danny's right, because you've essentially taken. My body has done labor to create the room the way that I want it, and if you've messed it up, you have messed around with the result of my body.
I'm saying you could be that kind of person that Snake just described. I'm not, right? And that's why it sounds silly. But the point is that if you could offend something that you identify with that's not your body, well, it's not your biology, right? Your biological aspect.
With respect to the room example, though, Snake, I mean, like, you are affecting something that is the result of your body, but my rejoinder question to you is that if you mess up the room, have you changed something about your nature, who you truly are, which is the question of our discussion here.
But that's determined by the agent. That's determined. Look, who you are is determined by the agent.
It is not determined. It's not determined by the agent at all, because I mean, like Lauren Southern, for example, wants to identify as an Apache attack helicopter. Just because she might feel like an Apache attack helicopter does not change the fact that she is a primate and she can't, she can't turn her propellers and then go off into the distance.
Why? You're just misunderstanding her. Let me explain what it's being meant to. Yeah, when someone says that I see myself as X, they could recognize that they don't have the body of X. Okay, so if I said
what do they have?
Well, they have a certain commitments that's who they are.
What are those commitments based on?
Well, I don't understand. That's like saying if I'm saying that something's the basis, and you're saying that what's the basis for that? The basis for identity is commitment. Who you're committed, what you're committed to, right? And if you're committed to saying something like, "I see myself," right? I'm committed to the sorts of the normative or the performative aspect of a helicopter or an Apache or whatever, a black person, a woman, whatever, right? There's no sense in which that's going to be false, right? You can admit Go ahead.
But it must, because I mean, like taking the example of gender, for example, the question of gender, as far as it goes, is a question of genetics, of whether or not
Well,
you have a
let me preface this that I'm not a silly. I'm not going to call you transphobe or anything. I'm not like that. Okay, so you can say speak freely. I'm not anything like these crazy left wing, cancel culture. You know, I'm not like that. Okay, so say what's on your mind. Nothing. You see what I'm saying? I'm just trying to say, please think freely and speak freely with me, and I'll keep it to myself as well, right? In case there's issues with other people. Okay.
Yeah, no problem. I don't have any issue with, I'm always basically going to speak my mind as far as it goes. And anybody who wants to try to cancel me, I'm just going to go tell them to fuck themselves.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying that you can say what you want, right? I'm around Christian. My parents feel the same way about what so I love people like that. I love because it creates an interesting dynamic for me, right? Because I disagree and I like that. But the idea. So, look. When someone, if I'm male, right? But let's say I chose to go through a transition anyway. Okay. That I could accept. You and I could agree on all of my physical facts. Yeah, I have XY chromosomes. I have a dick, right? I have a deep voice. I'm, all this stuff, right? I have a prostate. We could agree on that. Did you want to say something, Steve?
Well, I just want to say I think gender is far more, if not completely phenotypic and not genotypic, because...
Well, I think it's mental.
Well,
more than
I did heard. See, I mean, I know because Danny wants to go the mental route, but I mean, I didn't get to finish my thought there that I wanted to throw in genetics and morphology. Because a major thing for me is, do you have a dick between your legs, or do you have a vagina between your legs?
Well, even that you don't socially interact with people based on what's in their pants. It's the secondary sex characteristics.
I'm not talking about social interaction, though. I'm talking about how to identify the gender of a person.
But that's how we don't use genitals to identify.
We have different. Look, this should be very easy to clear up. You and I might have different concepts of a woman, right? It's not. I know this is probably our disagreement, but I don't think that if you lose your dick that suddenly you're a woman or you're not a man, right? I could cut your dick off and you'd still be a man. But the point is that even if you did, let's just say that we define man as having these traits. Okay, I just then I have a different concept. We just have different concepts. So there's nothing to disagree about. Right.
So I mean, to go toward what Snake was saying, even if it's the case, for example, that a question of genetics and morphology will determine the gender question, in terms of a social interaction, you may just decide that as a matter of courtesy, you will treat the person as they wish to be treated. So it doesn't really have social repercussions. It's a separate question. So as far as I'm concerned, gender is a matter of genetics and morphology. And if you have the Y chromosome, a dick in between your legs, and a pair of balls, even if they do cut them off, you still, you started out with them, and that is what you are. Now, how you want to treat that person in relation to social issues is a totally distinct issue as far as I'm concerned.
Do you think that if...
But do you check people's pants when they walk into the room, to gender them?
No, I don't have to, because there are many other things that give an indicator of what it is between their legs. Like, for example, a woman will have breasts, she'll have a lighter voice, she'll have less muscle mass, generally speaking.
But
these are indicators.
Let's be fair to Drayce.
Very passable trans people.
But let's be fair to Drayce for a second, okay? I think that we use different... The words are confusing, right? And we don't want to talk past each other. Sometimes when I say I went on a date with a girl, I just mean someone with boobs and a vagina. But sometimes I say that and I don't mean that, okay? Now, many cases, when we're talking about either our sex life, our dating life, our romantic relationships, when we say, oh yeah, I'm interested in men or women, we're not talking about a woman with a dick or a man with a vagina, typically, okay? Now, there are other contexts in which our concept of a woman and man are actually separate from those kinds of things. So the point is that the word fluctuates. There's a flux to it, and I don't want. And that's not interesting. that the only reason why I'm pointing this out is because we don't want to be doing this talking past each other, right? So the point is that if I decided to say, if I told you right now, Drayce, that I see myself as a woman, I think there's an intelligible way of saying that in a way where I can affirm that I have a dick, I have a low voice, and I have XY chromosomes, and etc. Right? And you're saying, well, there's got to be a contradiction, and I don't see the contradiction. Right?
So, well, the contradiction would be basically a matter of standard definition. You're trying to argue that there's a certain identity sense in which you psychologically believe yourself to be different in gender than what your body would actually determine you to be. And what I understand that to be would be delusion, because as far as I'm concerned, a matter of gender would come down to checking for the characteristics, the genetic and morphological.
This might shed light, but I take meaning as you.
So, really quick, I wanted to go over to something that Snake said, because he was saying, like, do you have to, are you going to check in the pants of every single person that walks in the room? And I responded back that, well, no, because there are a bunch of other indicators. And then he says, well, there are a lot of people who really do look, very, very in between. And
Not
insofar
just
as they do,
but on the full other side of the binary, where you actually can't tell.
Yeah.
They have secondary sex
Yeah.
characteristics.
So, but with respect to that, though, like, take, for example, somebody who I've seen who would really, like, fit into that category. I believe it's Linda Blair is the name and she's like a conservative or whatever.
Blair White?
Oh, that's what, Blair White. Yeah. So perfect example, I think, of what you're saying. Now, with respect to Blair White, there's no way I would be able to tell unless I checked in between this person's legs. But the reason why that happened, though, is because Blair has, gone the extra mile to make sure that she is displaying these characteristics. She's gone through all sorts of hurdles to make sure that she looks more and more like a woman. But if you were to just, if a person made no such effort and we're just going off of the way that their body naturally is without their active engagement in modifying it, then of course, in the vast majority of cases, you would be able to demarcate between a person who is a male and a person who is a female.
But what's the difference
based on
between
their
that
genetic and morphological characteristics?
What's the difference between that and taking like insulin or just working out? It's just a change to the physical body.
I'm not sure as what you mean by your question. Could you clarify that a bit?
Like, it's just, I feel like the delineation between natural here is kind of arbitrary, because you could say that taking insulin is an unnatural change of the body, because naturally you'd just die of diabetes if you didn't do that. Whereas, like, a lot of people get breast implants, but you can.
He might mean something natural, like unintentional or something, or artificial. Non-natural, maybe artificial. But
there's a lot of body modifications that we do that aren't considered delusional or outlandish. And you can take a supplemental hormone, and that can change the body automatically. Much like taking any medication that you would need to just stay alive.
Yeah, I mean, like, this though has to do with, like, in terms of like insulin and diabetes and stuff like that, but I don't think that corresponds to the question of a change in identity. You're doing what's necessary because of some kind of, like, you have diabetes, and so if you don't take it, you're going to die. But, taking it doesn't change your identity, which I guess is what you're getting at, but I don't see it as an identity issue. The question is more like in terms of gender. What is, when we say the word male, what do we mean? And when we say the word female, what do we mean? And depending upon what our definitions are, that's going to relate to the whole question of, okay, so psychologically you feel like something else. And what is the import of that? Like, if you feel like,
what do you mean by import? Sorry.
I think you do.
What is the value, or, like, what is the relevance of the fact?
I'm looking for a contradiction. That's what I'm looking for.
Right. And so the contradiction will be, if we're defining male and female as they are typically defined, the contradiction will be that you feel like a person who has 2X chromosomes, and you feel like a person who has two X chromosomes, a vagina in between your legs and breasts. You feel that way, but the contradiction is, as a matter of fact, you do not have any of these things.
Those are two different propositions. They don't establish a contradiction.
But how's that different from feeling like you want to be a bodybuilder, but you're scrawny, but then you go and make the changes?
Exactly. Well, I think that's something there. But the point is that there's no contradiction in saying I feel X, but I'm Y. There's no
because when you say feel, you're using that feel as a basis upon which to say that as a matter of fact, you are a woman, or as a matter of fact, you are a man. The feeling forms the basis for a supposition of fact. And now, if you're going to say that it is a fact upon the basis of your feeling, but as a matter of fact, the definitions of these terms are contradictory to your assertion of fact, that's the contradiction.
Wait. Why can't they just say I am a female, I am a woman, but I'm in the wrong body?
Yeah, I think that goes back to oughts. Like, I ought to be a woman.
Exactly. Yes, it's a commitment. Now, it's just like the Princess and the Frog, right? Look, or Drayce, if I kidnapped you and had weird mad scientist technology and turned you into a pig, okay, you'd be like, I'm a fucking human. I'm stuck in this pig's body.
Yeah, or like, I ought to be human.
That relies though on these kind of conceivability arguments.
Yes, it is a conceivability argument.
Right. But see, the thing is that that's a no-go for me, because I don't think that if you make the physiological changes, I'm going to agree with Leo and Speed on that. If you make those physiological changes, you're not going to have the same person at the end of it.
But there's a contradiction then. It's possible. You're saying it's impossible, right?
Yeah. If you reduce a human down to a
contradiction? No, I didn't say that. I said that if I kidnapped you and put your mind into the body of a pig,
right?
Okay, that's all I said.
Did you see that walrus
movie? What's the
movie?
Contradiction?
The contradiction would be like you would not retain your identity; it would be completely obliterated.
That's begging the question.
No, it isn't begging the question. I am rejecting your premise that the conceivability.
You're rejecting the conclusion. You're not rejecting the premise.
I'm rejecting your whole operation, is what I'm doing.
What's the argument? Give me the contradiction.
The whole thing is like, in terms of conceivability arguments, you're saying like, well, I can conceptualize that we can make this. Yes, you are.
Listen to what I'm saying. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm getting irritated. I'm just saying that there's no contradiction between saying I have placed or transferred your mind to the body of a pig. Right. There's a logical contradiction there on your view, and I want to hear it. That's not conceivability.
No, but see, the whole thing is that what you're suggesting, though, is that you're transferring your brain to the pig, and then
I didn't say that. I said the mind.
Right. Okay. So, hold on, though, because when you say that, though, you're transferring the mind. But originally, when you did this, like it was like this whole like surgery thing where you're like putting your brain into the pig.
I use technology to do it.
Right. So the thing, though, is that like you're using technology and you take the brain of a human being and you put it into a pig. If you do that, as far as I'm concerned, because
I didn't say that.
Okay, so then
I said the mind.
The mind, right. And that is my objection, because I do not draw a distinction there between mind and brain. There is a dependency relation between the mental and the brain, and also it even extends
identity or dependency. Identity or dependency.
I would say that as far as it goes, there's both a dependency relation, but it is necessary, but also not necessarily sufficient, because there are other things besides the brain that influence your mental life, such as the hormones that you have in your body.
It's an easy question. Is it identity or non-identity?
It is dependency. Let's go there.
Identity. So it's not identity?
It would. Yeah, I can't go as far as identity because well, I'm really tempted.
There's no logical contradiction then. If you don't have identity, there's no logical. What are the laws of logic that would make this impossible?
Because you're not listening to this. Because there's a dependency relationship between the mental and the brain. And so and more than the brain, I'm saying, because of all of the different physiological processes that are going on in your body. So the second that you make that transition, you are automatically obliterating what the person is.
Dependency is related to necessity, right? Necessity is only construed in terms of logical necessity. Otherwise, you're appealing to physical or metaphysical necessity. But under those cases, those are not going to be the sorts of constraints that grant you impossibility with respect to the hypothetical.
Why not?
Well, because I'm making the claim that it's logically possible, and you're
Right, and I reject. No.
Okay,
no,
so that
but
means you
hold on, logically possible, but that doesn't get us anywhere. We want to
that
really
does
figure
get us
out.
somewhere. That grants us the hypothetical.
No, it doesn't. Because the whole question is, if that person wakes up, and perhaps I am, perhaps I am confusing what you're saying, but if what would be entailed by your position, right, is that when the pig with the human brain wakes up, right, or the pig with the human brain, I'm going to go for it first, and then I'll clarify this in a second. When this thing wakes up, it's still going to retain the same identity that it had in the human body and feel like it is a human still. And I reject that will be so, because there is a dependency relation between the mental and the brain, and also not just the brain, but all of the different physiological processes that are going on in your human body.
When
If
you say dependency relation, do you mean necessity? Is there necessity? Is it logical, metaphysical, or physical? Logical, metaphysical, or physical possibility or necessity?
I guess let's just go with physical for now.
Okay, I'm not speaking with respect to physical necessity. I'm talking about, is it logically necessary that you would require a brain with a mind?
I guess it really would end up becoming like a logical matter then, because if you need the physical aspects to it, then it would lead down to it would lead to
necessity. Need and necessity. Okay, necessity. So once again, if it's logical necessity, that means it means the same thing.
Yeah, so let's go ahead. Let's go the full branch and say logical necessity here.
Okay, then that means that it's necessary, not just simply dependent, right? In a sense of a cause.
But when I said that dependency thing, I meant it in terms of necessity.
Right, there are different kinds of necessities, right? It could be. I could grant it's metaphysically necessary for the sake of argument, right? But that's not going to help us with respect to a hypothetical that just is understood in terms of logical constraints, right?
So. Yeah, I want to throw in here really quick though, because I mean, like when you guys are talking this way about like the way that you feel, I mean, like I just when I think about this, I like, and you feel like a woman, so therefore you are a woman, or you're a woman and you feel like a man, so therefore you are a man. I could just as easily feel tomorrow that I'm Napoleon Bonaparte, like many schizophrenics do. But what do we do with such people?
No,
we do not treat them as if they are in fact Napoleon Bonaparte.
I don't see why they would be. Look, they must be talking about something when they identify as Napoleon Bonaparte. I don't see in virtue of what they would be wrong.
Well,
the reason why it sounds crazy is because our notion of Napoleon Bonaparte is different.
I think that there is a problem with saying that merely identifying as something it makes you that thing, because I mean, in Lemon Impact, if you're just using it as a label, if you're saying I am a woman, I identify as a woman, therefore I am a woman, but you can't describe what you mean by that, that's kind of a meaningless statement. But if you mean, I think it has to reference, at least in this case, some sort of physical change. And then
I don't think so. Look, think about Princess and the Frog. They are humans. We would agree. The little 5-year-old that watches the show says
they're people.
They are human.
They're people.
But that's begging the question, because of course the physicalist thinks that such a thing is absolutely impossible, that this is Disney fantasy for a reason.
Well, I don't see the logical contradiction.
Well, the logical contradiction rests in the fact of the results that would incur, and the results would be contradictory. It would not leave you with an identity relation.
Give me the two propositions that are contradictory.
The two propositions that are contradictory. So the proposition is, I am the same person in the pig's body as I was in the human body. But as a matter of fact, because of all of the physical dependencies that you have, you are in fact, there's no way.
I'm begging the question.
You are begging the question by supposing that the conceivability.
I'll type your argument for you, and I'll show you why it's begging the question. So the question, remember,
how are you not mostly the same?
Look at the private chat. Okay, so the whole claim, right, that I'm making is that it is not. So that the possibility is that I am in my mind controls a pig body. Okay, that's the claim, right? Okay, my mind controls a pig body. So you're saying you're saying there's a contradiction there, a contradiction between. So Let's hear the two print. Let's see. Let's show. The first proposition you said was what?
The first proposition with regard to
What the
what?
contradiction in the claim that I just put? I put it in the private chat.
The contradiction is that the idea. What I'm saying is that when you say my mind controls a pig body, where like my mind refers to the original human for which this transplant took place, there is no more my mind. You
No,
just
I just mean, all I mean by the mind is my beliefs and desires and identity and commitments. That's
right,
all I
which is all right out the window the second you make that surgery.
How?
Okay, what's the contradiction?
Because of the physiological necessity of how it all comes about. Because consciousness and mentality is all
two propositions. Let's get the first one. There should only be two propositions. Okay. That's all you need to get a contradiction.
So my first point here is that mentality is tied to your physiology.
Oh, okay. I want an argument for that.
Okay, so for example, all of the different arguments for mind-brain dependence, that the second that you start screwing with the brain,
identity. Are you saying dependency or identity? Once again.
Yeah, so I went as far when we went this way before. I was talking about a dependency relationship. If you want to go as far as identity, I'm happy to make the claim, because as far as it goes, if you change that relationship, you are changing the identity. But I'm arguing that that's because of a dependency
relationship. What I just put in the chat. You're making the claim that mentality is identical to bodily states. Right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
What's the argument?
So since mentality is identical to bodily states, the second that you change those bodily states, you're changing the mentality. So when you say...
Let me write that down. Let me write that down and show you why you're making the question. Let me write that down and show you. Look, you said mentality, word for word. I show you why that the conclusion is in that premise. I promise you. I know this stuff, okay? I know what textbook begging the question is. I'll write it. So give me the argument for the first premise. Give me the argument for the mentality is identical to body states.
Which I already did by referencing all of the different cases where you start messing with the physiology, you change the mentality.
Okay, change in mental means change in physical. That's not. First of all, that doesn't get you to. Therefore, it's identical.
No, you did that backwards. Change in physical means change in mental.
It doesn't matter.
Yes, it sure does matter, because you are talking about a physical change when you make that jump from the human to the pig. So of course, if it's dependent on physical states and you make a physical change, there is a change in the mentality.
Look, are you saying that the mentality is identical to the body states, is supported by the premise that because there's a change in the physical, there's a change in the mental? Is that what you're really saying?
Yeah, I am saying that. I'm saying that that's
so
good.
When you're asleep, when you're asleep and I put a little indentation in your hair, your body has changed?
No. Yeah, my body has changed, but not the relevant aspects in terms of mentality.
Relevant aspects,
because there's only certain aspects of the physiology that are related to your mentality. Your hair has nothing to do with your mentality.
So,
but your brain does, your hormones does, your nervous
the hypothetical is saying, what if we transfer the relevant aspects to the pig body?
Right, and the thing is that that's impossible, because you're getting rid of so much of the body.
Look, the whole argument depends on change the physical. Look,
even if you just took the brain itself, right, and you divorced it from all of the different hormones and the nervous system reactions and everything like that going on in the human body, that's no longer you.
Snake said it perfectly. Snake said it perfectly. The second that you say relevance, the second you beg the question.
No, not at all, because you're basically...
Relevant just means the sufficient properties, right? Right?
Relevant means the necessary properties, yes.
Right. But I'm saying that in the beginning that the mind is whatever my identity already has a sufficient properties.
We're in the hypothetical. We're assuming that the relevant properties are able to be transferred. However, weird science fiction and magic way you do it.
Right, and I'm saying that that's utterly impossible. There's never any way that you'll ever be able to do that.
Okay, but it cannot be supported by just the premise that if there's a change in the body, then there's change in the mental. Well, the second that you say, well, it's a change with respect to the relevant bodily changes, then I'm going to say, in virtue of what are they relevant?
In virtue of the fact that these particular physiological states are what is responsible for the production of the mentality.
Wait, but then I could accept that, but that's going to be a contingent fact. That's always going to be a contingent fact. Identity is a necessary fact, right? What produces my mental states? Well, something else could produce them.
What could have possibly? Well, I mean, like you might be able to do like a whole sort of like fantasy thing, right? Where you come up with like certain scenarios that you have like some kind of mentality that you can produce. As far as it works in the real world, mentality is produced by physical mechanisms.
I grant that, but that's a contingent fact. That's going to be a contingent fact, not a necessary one. Identity is a necessary claim. When you say mentality is identical to bodily states, that's a claim of necessity.
But see, the thing is that, like, you know, necessary relationships, though, like that, I mean, like, depending on your definitions, if you have two contingent things.
Logical stuff. We're using law of identity, law of contradiction.
I think that, like, there's just, like, so much confusion going on here. But at the same time, what I want to say is.
Confused.
Well, no, I think you are seriously confused about all sorts of different shit, because what you want to say is that you can really make this transfer, and I'm denying that you can. Now,
There's
the thing is,
contradiction. You failed to point it out. You failed.
I just gave you an argument to that effect because there are.
No, so change in the middle does not establish identity.
So here we go. Change. So you have change in physical means change in mental, right? And then you want to go over to where is that? Where the hell is it? Fucking my mind is in a pig's body. All right, so you've changed something that's physical. Okay? You just did that. No, how? You are, it's part of your whole thing that you just made a physical change.
No.
Now in a pig's body, not in a human anymore.
No, listen what I'm saying. I did not say any physical thing. I just said my mind is now controlling the pig's body. Doesn't mean the pig's body's changed.
No, but your state has changed from originally being in a human body to now being in a pig's.
But my body right now as it is consistent with there not being any mind.
No, it isn't.
What's the argument?
The argument is that there are physiological processes. I'm sorry, Snake, I'll say this real quick, and then yeah, it's your guys' floor again. But there are physiological processes that are responsible for the production of consciousness. Now what you're saying is that, like, my body as it is right now is compatible with not being conscious. Could you have those physiological factors not have mind? Let me just finish this thought. Because your physiological processes are going on right now that are responsible for the production of consciousness, there's no way that you have those physiological processes at work that don't produce that consciousness.
What's the contradiction?
I just said what it was.
No, that's not a contradiction. You're saying if X causes Y. No, shut up. Shut up.
Fuck off, dude.
If I said X causes Y, that doesn't mean that X is necessary. For Y, right? You could have X and no Y, dumbass.
No, because the whole thing is that if X
causes Y, you do not need Y to have X, dumbass.
Hold on. If X causes Y, you do not need what? Say that one more time.
If X causes Y, you don't need Y to have X.
Sure. Okay.
Then that means that if your physiological processes cause the mind, doesn't mean that if there's no mind, you don't have those physiological processes.
I'm not saying that I'm totally confused because I don't think you're capturing my position at all when you say that.
Well, I'm going to sit down and listen then.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, but at the same time, I already said everything that I wanted to say. That the whole thing is that if it's the case that a certain organization of the physicality of the physical necessarily by its nature will produce a conscious experience, that it is that organization that is necessary in order to do that. And then you make a corresponding change in that.
Is it logical necessity? Because if it is, you're begging the question. Because I'm going to reject it.
Yeah, I know you reject it, but in turn, I also reject your supposition that it isn't. So when you just draw up the princess and the frog, that's begging the question, because this is the whole point at issue about whether or not.
Look, for sake of argument, I'm fine with shifting the burden to myself. Do you want me to? Do you prefer that? I'll show you why there's no contradiction.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So when I say my mind, okay, I mean my beliefs and desires. Okay. Now, beliefs and desires are normative. Okay, so there's my mind. I mean my beliefs and desires. That is my norm. Those are normative. They can fail. My belief can fail with respect to the truth. My desires can fail with respect to how I want the world to be. My body, on the other hand, okay, is something that cannot fail. It's purely It can be purely described, or it's a set of descriptions. It's a set of descriptive states. They cannot fail. Okay? My body does not fail only with respect to an intention does it fail. If I wanted to raise my right hand instead of raise my left, the only sense in which we could say I failed was because I wanted to raise my right hand and not my left hand. Right? That's a belief or desire. Okay? So if I have no such beliefs and desires and I'm just moving, my body's just moving, there's no failure or success. Okay? So for any physiological fact you give me, it's going to be descriptive. It's not going to be, this is in other words, the rule following paradox, right? That any behavior that you see of mine, whether that be brain activity, whether it be physiology, whether it be hormones, any physical fact, it's going to be consistent with consistent with one particular role or inconsistent with a myriad of others. That's to say, inconsistent with a desire or inconsistent with an infinite number of others. Okay? So if I just remove the rule, right, I can still have what I was considered success or failure. Okay? So there are mutually exclusive meanings. Okay? Such that it cannot be identical. So when you say that the mind then leaves the body, that doesn't require necessary changes to the body. Since they're mutually exclusive concepts.
I have to apologize because a lot of that is coming across to me as total gobbledygook. So, I mean, like, when you're saying that the body cannot fail, but the mind can fail in relation to the production of, like, the fulfillment of certain desires and stuff like that, right? Yeah. So, but at the same sense, like, you know, if we're talking about if the goal is the fulfillment of the desire, and the body acts in such a way that it fails to achieve the desire, then why isn't the body failing?
Now, I agree that there's a relational property between that descriptive state that it's failed, it's out of conformity, out of accord with the goal or desire. The goals or desires, right? But I'm saying that if you take away the goal is gone. There's no sense in which that relation holds, right? So the body does not fail.
Okay, but I mean, like, similarly, if you take away that desire for the mind isn't failing. So I just don't understand your distinction.
Wait. If I take away the standard, there's no standard. I understand that. Okay. So what I'm saying is that the standard and that which can be in or out of accord with the standard are conceptually distinct, so they cannot be identified.
Sorry, man. Say that one more time.
That's fine. The standard and that which is either in or out of accord with the standard are conceptually distinct, right? You can have no standard and have those physical states or those descriptive states, and you can have no descriptive. Go ahead.
Okay, because I mean, like, in terms of the physiology and stuff like that, this kind of gets back into human nature, because I would question whether or not you can have that change in physiological state and then not have a corresponding change in what desires you have.
Look, the problem with the Kripke-Putnam essentialism, right, which is what nature boils down to, if you don't mean logical necessity, okay, is that there's going to be a world in which you could have otherwise, right? And that's just the hypothetical that I'm talking about.
Right, and yeah, so making that clear then, because I'm like kind of like out there on like the distinctions that you're drawing there with logical and metaphysical and physical and all that stuff, and I was confused about how I really wanted to go about it. But when you say it like that, then yeah, I do want to go down the logical route for sure. And insofar as like we're having this conversation, right, the whole question about conceivability arguments is whether or not this relation exists, you know, because the whole conceivability argument rests on the fact that this relation does not exist.
Yeah, look, it's true that conceivability arguments might be a lot weaker than what I'm giving, right? What I'm giving is saying that the mind and the body are conceptually distinct in a way where they're mutually exclusive for one another. You can't identify them, right? That's to say, now it's true. It's not very good argument to say that, look, I can imagine a world in which I'm in a pig's body. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying something much more technical and much more rigorous, okay? That here's why anything the mind, specifically beliefs and desires, is mutually exclusive with the body. Okay? Because the mind, right, dictates the standard, and the body either conforms to it or does not conform to it. That if you eliminate the mind, you could still have those descriptive states that no longer have that relation of failure and success. In the same way that you can eliminate the body, right, and still have that standard.
Yeah, and that's the whole question at issue, because I deny that you're able to do that.
Right. So now, what if they're conceptually distinct? If you accept that, then you can separate them in a hypothetical, right? Just like and I'm making a strong claim. I'm saying they're mutually exclusive, but let's just say with distinctness for right now, man and bachelor are distinct concepts, right? But they can come together, right? You can have a married bachelor, right? But they're not going to be. But the point is, sorry, unmarried bachelor. The point is that they're distinct concepts. So you can have a man who's unmarried. Sorry, you can have a person that's unmarried, and you can have a man that's not married and still a man.
Yep.
Okay. So in the same way, right, that the body, okay, is conceptually distinct from the mind, such that you can divorce them without a change.
Yeah, I understand that you're saying that. I just think that that's total phooey.
Okay, are you gonna show a logical contradiction?
Well, the whole thing is that, like, when you're going into the relationship there between mind and body, I think that you will uncover an identity relation in the sense that if you have a certain set of physiological properties of the body, necessarily you will have a corresponding conscious experience.
What's the argument of necessity? Right?
Well,
if it's logical necessity, you can't appeal to change. You can't appeal to cause effect.
Because it's a matter of what we're talking about in terms of our definitions, right? Like, what is the mental and what is the body?
I've defined it for us. I've defined it. Okay.
So here we go in terms of like my mind, which are my beliefs and desires, right? Now my body is what produces my beliefs and my desires, is my position as a physicalist.
Look, first of all, you could. I'm a dualist and I accept stuff like that. Okay. If X causes Y, doesn't mean that X is identical to Y. We know this. Okay? And if X causes Y, that's going to be a contingent fact. A contingent fact. Because you could always have X or Y divorced from one another.
But do you think you would still have the same basic identity if you were just a brain in a jar?
Well, that's just going to underdetermine what you experience. Think of the brain in the vat example.
But what I'm saying is if you can transfer the beliefs and the desires.
Yeah, so look, it could be the case that I could transfer my mind to a pig's body and then actually still think that I'm in this room talking to you and have all the perceptual qualities and whatnot, right? But I'm actually just a pig. So there might not be any changes with respect to the body.
So have you guys seen that the walrus movie Tusk, where the guy gets kidnapped and turned into a walrus?
No. Yeah, no, I haven't watched it, but I know of it. It's by the same guy who does like Clerks and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's
Kevin
bizarre.
Smith.
So, like, does it change the hypothetical for you, Drayce, if instead of transferring the brain, instead you're like surgically warping the body into something else?
Yeah, I mean, like, it will, again, it's going to depend on what it is that you're changing, because, like, I have no problem with the idea of, like, you transplanting an arm or something like that. But if you start screwing with things like hormones and the nervous system and all sorts of stuff like that, by my perspective, there is a necessary change that's going to result in your conscious experience.
I think that's a given.
Is it logical or not? Because you've said this like 6 times.
Yeah, and I've already answered you like 6 times by going down the logical route.
But you accepted that cause effect doesn't get you necessity. You've accepted that.
Yeah, but see, the thing is that because it's like, it's not simply a matter of cause and effect, is what I said before, because we're also talking about a matter of definitions here.
Well, if it's a matter of definition, we're not talking about cause effect anymore.
Well, because the thing is that, like, yeah, because the thing, like, I want to see how I, like, really want it, because this is, I'm kind of, like, confused here about when I want to express myself on this point. But as far as it goes, like, what I'm going to just try to reiterate myself, I guess. As far as it goes, because I feel that the mind is a product of the body, any kind of corresponding change is going to result in a change. And if we're talking about an identity relationship where your mind in the one situation is identical to your mind in the next situation, I'm arguing that that is impossible because of the physiological changes that take place where, because of those physiological
But in the hypothetical...
Look, let me try again. X causes Y. Does that mean that do you think there's a necessity with respect to causation for X and Y? Just knowing that?
Yes, because in this particular case, there's only one way in which we can produce conscious experience.
I know that's just repeating the claim that it's necessary when you say there's one way. One way is saying there's necessary, right? Yeah. Now, when I'm saying that, is that if X is not Y, right, then they're conceptually distinct, right?
Right, a notion which I reject.
Wait, so is it X causing X or Y causing Y?
What in the world? What I'm saying is that it's impossible to make a change in the body without a corresponding change in the other. And the reason why is because there's only one way to produce that conscious experience, which are the physiological processes of that body.
Production, look, when you say produce, that's a cause-effect notion.
Right, but since there's only one way to do it.
That's just begging the question because I'm rejecting necessity.
Right, you are rejecting necessity, but I am not. And so that's
and
the
I'm
whole thing.
asking for the argument, right? And I'm showing I'm trying to help you that saying that if Y is the product of X, there cannot be necessity with respect to that causal connection. There cannot be, right?
Even if it's the case that there's no other way to produce it.
That's just saying. Even if it's the case, if it's necessary, you're just repeating yourself. I'm saying that X and Y.
I'm sorry. Yeah, perhaps I'm just totally misunderstanding your point, Danny, and it's just not getting through my numbskull brain. But again, I mean, like, I would like to hear from you, for example. Could you give me an example of how you might be able to produce conscious experience without that kind of physicality, where you would be able to demarcate the relationship?
I don't see what turns on the question.
But I think what we're
saying...
saying...
I said I don't know. Who cares?
I think what we're saying is, in the hypothetical, we're transferring all the necessary physical states that will sustain the same mental states. However,
okay, so in that case, though, what you're going to end up with is like basically, I mean, you need to transfer like the whole nervous system. You need to transfer all the hormones. You need to transfer all of the shit. And so as far as it goes, like, you know, I mean, like,
just the core.
Well, I mean, like a shit ton of it. So I mean, like, yeah, but like a ton of it, though. I mean, like, including like all the different things that are responsible for the regulation of brain activity.
It's easier to do this. You've got to get them conceptually. Look, X causes Y. I don't know what it makes to. If you're talking about logical necessity, then you're saying that it's identity. But if it's cause effect, the cause cannot be identical to the effect. Can't be identical, otherwise you don't have cause effect. Okay.
Sure.
So that means that it's not a matter of cause effect, but you're saying that it is. So you're gonna have to revise your view.
Okay. So I mean, like, maybe I'm just confused in the way that I'm trying to present it. But as far as it goes, like, yeah, I am trying to suggest that there is a necessary causal relation between these things.
Logical. Because remember, what are the three rules of logic that we're using here to establish that kind of necessity? Either there's a contradiction, it's necessarily false, right? Either it's identical, the law of identity, right, which is necessarily true, okay? Or it's bivalent, right? We're not talking about bivalence here, okay? So if there's necessity, it means that it's necessarily false, it's a contradiction, or it's necessarily true. It's identical. Nowhere do you get cause effect there.
Danny,
so you must be talking...
Are you saying that there are different set of conditions that can cause the same end result?
There could be. Like,
and that's what I was asking you before, to like give me an illustration of that.
I don't know. I could look, if you wanted to have a conversation with me, right, which you do, right, there's all sorts of reasons for that. You could have want to have a conversation with me. There are different conditions for that. Okay. Now, but it's the same belief, same desire. Okay. I mean, it doesn't matter. What if I told you I don't know? It doesn't matter that I don't know.
But it does, because you're suggesting that it's possible, though. And if you're suggesting that's a possibility,
if it's possible, there's no contradiction.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is that you are suggesting that it's possible, right? And so since you're suggesting,
so I can either try to support my claim and saying, look, here's the concept here, here's the concept here, and I did that for you. I said, look, here's the cause, here's the effect. If the cause is logically identical to the effect, then you've destroyed the concept of cause and effect, because everyone accepts that cause and effect are distinct. They're different. They're not identical.
No, I can understand that. No, that's a little bit more clear for me now. So I get that, what you're saying there, that you can make a distinction between the two in terms of like cause and effect. So the way that I would try to respond to that is that what ultimately consciousness is for me is the cumulative activity of various different aspects of the brain all interacting with each other. And so when we're talking about, let me see if I can try to gather this here. I apologize for not being able to express myself very well with this.
And I'm sorry that I'm not. I think if I were to rewatch myself talking to you, there was a lot of I would take blame for a lot of the miscommunication. And I don't think you're stupid. I called you a dumbass. I think you're. Okay.
No, it's cool, man. I mean, like things get a little heated sometimes. I don't take it too personally.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, so you were talking about how cause and then effect, and how there's not an identity relationship between the cause and the effect. So for me, like the identity relation that I want to stipulate here, is the mental, right? That's the first thing that we're going for. And the identity relationship is with the cumulative action of different interacting parts of the brain.
Okay.
So
can those parts of the brain, are they standards?
Are they standards in the sense that
do they create the possibility of success or failure?
Do they create the possibility of success or failure? Yeah.
Okay.
In the sense that, yep.
So brain states, you're telling me that they are normative. They're not descriptive.
Yeah, if you put a certain kind of organization of brain states such that all together they have a particular kind of unifying activity, then yes, there's an identity relationship there.
So they're not descriptive. So you can't describe that part of the brain.
Oh, but see, here's the thing, like when we're talking about like this kind of divide between normativity and standards and the descriptive world, and this gets back to the whole question of like the is-ought bridge, because like, we've talked about at length, I do not think that such a sharp dividing line is possible, like, or at least I do not think that separating these two things into two totally distinct worlds where one doesn't come from the other, I don't think that that's a viable position.
No, come from. That's not it. Let's be very technical. I'm not saying they don't interact.
Right. I know you're saying. I know you're saying that they don't interact.
There's no identity.
So what I'm saying though is that like more than just interaction, what's going on here is that one is really just a subset of the other. The world of is that you're talking about, that you want to, suggest is a totally independent realm, is actually just a sub-realm of the is.
Okay, so you're saying ought is just is then?
Yes, it's a particular kind of is.
Okay, well that means that there's just descriptive statements. All there are, right? That Oz is it, therefore they're just is's. No oughts.
No. There are oughts. They are subsets of the is though.
Yeah, but look, I can just eliminate look, if I said I could eliminate the word bachelor for unmarried man, right?
You could sorry, say that one more time.
I could eliminate the word bachelor and substitute it for unmarried man, right?
Yep.
Okay. So we're gonna eliminate odd and just put is. That means it just is.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, like, this goes back to our conversation about.
Okay, then that means there can't be a fact of the matter about success or failure.
No, there most certainly can be. And like the thing is that, like, when we were talking about this before, right? Like, you were saying, like, how do you get these oughts, right? Where the world should be a particular way that it's not. When really we're just talking about.
You're just saying is, right? You're not saying ought.
But I am saying ought as a subset of the is, and I want to try to explain to you how I make sense of that.
Go ahead.
Okay. So with respect to this, like, the question that you were posing in our previous conversation with speed, it kind of runs back to the same argument where you just have this one world of is, right? Just one world. There's only one. So how in the world do you come up with these oughts, a way that the world should be, that would be different from the way that the world actually is? And the way that I understand the emergence of that is by the competitive aspects that are within the is category, that you have a certain class of ises, which are moral agents who have a particular set of desires. They want a particular X to take place. But just as much a part of the world of is the environment, is all the different things that are going on that would contradict or negate those interests. And so when we're talking about ought, what we're talking about is that the the action of the human being is oriented toward a particular outcome, even if it would be completely contrary to the way that the outside world would, the non-moral agent aspect of the world is working.
Okay.
Can you understand? Like, are you guys able to follow?
Everything that you said up until just then, I disagree with. I don't know what a non-moral agent is. I think all agents.
For non-moral agent was a very poor. That's not accurate. Non-moral aspects of the world. So, like, take the anything else outside of the outside environment, anything else outside of that particular being that we're talking about. So the example that I gave last time was you have an organism. Part of the aspect of the organism is to survive. That is one particular goal that the organism has to reach, right? However, the environment may be negating that in the sense that it's driving the organism to extinction. And so within the world of you have these competing elements where the environment is driving it toward extinction, but the organism itself is moving towards survival. And that is how you get the emergence of ought from the world of as a subset, in the sense that
I don't know what you mean by emergence here.
In the sense that, like, the emergence of the category, I guess you could say. It's not separate at all. It's just it's a subset of it. And it just refers to those particular aspects of the moral agent as opposed to, what's going on elsewhere.
Look, if I said there is a brain state, is that prescriptive? Or is it potentially prescriptive?
It's potentially prescriptive.
Okay. Do you think that all right, let me give you an analogy very fast, and then I have to go. I'll give you the last word. This is the quick, as fast as I can. There's a case in which a tornado goes through a junkyard, creates let's do the reverse. Let's say there's some person that creates a robot that supposed to fish 3 fish out of a lake. Okay? They've constructed it, and it goes to do that task. And then at the same time, there's a tornado that goes through a junkyard and produces a identical robot. Okay, an identical robot, and it goes to do something. It goes to it does the test too, right? It's going to go fish 3 fish from the lake. They both trip, and instead of getting 3 fish, they only get 2 fish because the robot changed. Which one malfunctioned?
They both tripped, and both of them just produced 2?
Yeah.
And your question is what, one more time?
Which one malfunctioned?
They both did.
In virtue of what did the robot that was produced by the tornado malfunction?
Well, since they're both identical in the sense that the tornado produced an identical robot, and since both of their functions is to get, a certain number of fish out of the lake.
Wait, no,
since both
function. I didn't say anything about function.
Well, because you said they're identical, right? So
yeah.
Basically, because they're identical, the robot that was produced by the tornado is automatically going to go try to fish those 3 out of the lake, right? That's what you're saying.
It doesn't try to do anything, right? The programmer, the person that made the robot, didn't build an intention in the robot.
But it's still going to have that program to get 3 fish under normal conditions.
Yeah, it's
right. So, and so in your scenario, so both of them, right? Like the one produced by the tornado and the one produced by the programmer, both of them are programmed in such a way that they're fishing a certain number of fish out of this lake. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in this situation, it is true that both of them do not produce the number that they are programmed to produce?
The computation renders them to get 2 fish, not 3 fish, because of they fell. Right. They broke or something.
Right.
Or not broke, but they fell over and tripped.
Sure. So in that case, since they're programmed, both of them, to produce a certain number of fish from the lake, and both of them fail to do so, I would suggest that both of them have failed.
Okay. What if now let's just take out the designer. Okay. Let's say that there was a program, right? The same robot produced by the tornado. It had the computational inner workings to get 3 fish, but something to where it changed to 2, right? Because it just changed to 2. Do you think that that's a failure?
It changed to 2 in like what manner? It's not done by the programmer. It's just
there's no more program. Look, there's no more programmer. There's like a robot. So look, what I'm trying, you know what I'm trying to do. Tornado designer wanted 3 fish, okay? But then the computation changed as it traveled, okay? The tornado produces the robot, the computation changed to 2. So both robots get 2 fish. Did the robot that was produced by the tornado, can we say that change was a failure?
The one with respect to the tornado, yeah. So because I would agree, I think, with what you were saying before about the absence of the intention. So because the tornado didn't have any intention to produce the particular kind of robot that gets 3 instead of 2, I would not say that there's really a failure in that case.
Right, and so we do agree that intentions are unique in the sense they create the possibility of failure or success, right?
So with respect to that, in this particular case, yes, I'm definitely going to agree that, you know,
there might be other norms. Look, I'm not, I want to say what I'm saying is compatible with moral realism for the moment. I don't want to debate moral realism at the moment. Okay. I'm just saying that one kind of norm is an intention, that we can't appeal to any of the facts about the robot to get a failure.
Heard. At the same time, though, what I will say is that in the case of the tornado, we're talking about just like random, haphazard. There's no particular orientation to what's going on.
Laws of physics.
Right. But see, the thing is that there are ways in which to produce a kind of failure, even without there being conscious processes involved, without there being intentions. Because the reason we discussed this prior with respect to the whole question about whether or not natural selection can produce a coherent notion of function, and I argued with you that it can because of the different kinds of trajectories that the living population and the environment produce with respect to the dynamics between them, that because there's a particular reason that's selected for something, in that sense, you end up with a kind of teleology.
The normative notion of failure demands correction. I don't think natural selection has anything to do with correction. Right?
It does.
When I fail, I correct. If I can.
Sure. It certainly does, though, I would argue, with respect to the environment, because the whole question is, can the organism survive in the environment? Natural selection weeds out those that can't.
Look, there's going to be an open question of whether that's good or bad. There's always going to be an open question there.
So with the whole thing about natural selection, the question is whether or not you get to a kind of prescriptivity or normativity notion. And the whole thing is that if you do, you could like kind of trace it back to an intention. The only thing is that the intention would be the intention of the organism or the living population to survive. They, going through time with that intention, are morphed by the environment to produce certain kinds of features with particular kinds of functions.
The intention of survival could imply not survival. That in fact, the desire, but in fact, it could be even worse than that, right? The desire to survive could bring about death, whereas the desire to die could bring about survival.
How in the world?
Failure. That's the notion of failure.
I mean, like if you have, it is, I mean, it's I guess I could say that it's like theoretically possible that if you have in a kind of like totally divorced from a reality Plantingan sense, when he talks about the kind of person who wants to pet the tiger and he thinks the best way to do that is to run away. But the thing is that if the second that you try to project that into the long term, it fails, because you can't operate upon such a procedure and perpetuate yourself in the long term. It just depends
on the environment. What are you talking about?
Right, but see, the whole thing is that if you're totally divorced from your environment and acting in a completely contrary way, natural selection, the whole point of it is that it eliminates you.
No. It depends. What eliminates you is the environment, not the belief.
Well, the belief is causing a certain course of action, yes?
But that action's not necessitated by the belief. There's possibility of failure or success.
Well, hold on, because if you're saying that if you have a particular belief and that you can divorce that from any kind of action that it prescribes.
Behavior, yeah.
Sure. And so, I mean, like, that just seems very odd to me to suggest that you can have a belief that prescribes a certain kind of behavior, and then even though you have the belief, you don't engage in that behavior.
Right.
If the behavior is destructive to your prospects for survival, and you have the belief that leads you to that course of action that's destructive for your survival, and the way that the environment is going to work is by eliminating you from the population.
That's a tautology. If it's destructive, yeah, then that means there's something about the environment that will destroy you because it's defined as destructive, right?
Well,
The point is that what natural selection can at best select for is behavior, not intention. Right?
But see, well, so hold on though, because if intentions do lead to behavior, because natural selection,
not always, they could lead to not behavior.
Right, but see, even in that sense, you're still ending up with a kind of the course of action that you end up with in that case is just idleness, and whether or not
I'll count that as behavior. That's fine.
Okay. And so, I mean, like, you know, if the environment is such that idle hands lead to destruction, then that's what you get is that destruction.
That's a tautology.
Sure. But, well, I mean, like, the whole question about.
Why would I disagree with a tautology?
But see, the thing is that when you're saying like you're trying to make this distinction, right, between the belief and some kind of course of action. If you're willing to say that even idleness counts as a course of action, then I don't understand how you can make that distinction.
I'm saying that the environment is going to select for behavior, not intention.
But it does select for intention if intention leads to particular kinds of behavior.
It doesn't have that causal disposition. You could have that behavior and have the opposite intention.
But I don't understand the coherence. If you have a particular...
If certain intentions constantly cause certain actions, then there is a relationship.
No, well, there could be it could be that people normally, when they want to scratch their back, that you could have a correlation of people putting their arm around their back and moving it, right? The point is that if there's selection going on, it's going to be selection of this behavior, not the intention.
Well, but it is successful behavior could be selected for because the intention is causing the behavior successfully.
Yeah, but I could be doing this because of another desire, or because my body is doing something that I'm not aware of.
So what I'm trying to go for there is just saying that because I'm saying that intention leads to behavior, even if counting idleness too as a particular kind of behavior, because natural selection is acting on that behavior. In turn, in an indirect manner, it is also selecting for those intentions. Because it's those intentions that lead to that behavior to begin with.
Yeah, it's selecting for the cause.
Look, here's what I'm saying. With respect to an environment, all you know is that there's a tiger. Okay? And then I'm just going to tell you there's the desire to run. Okay? Does the person survive?
The fastest runner is more likely to survive than the slower.
I didn't say anything. All I said was there's a tiger and there's a desire to run.
Yep. But I mean, like, I'm pointing out that it's important to consider the whole question of, like, how well they're able to run, because if you have it sure does with respect to natural selection.
The point is that running fast or running slow or not running is all consistent with that desire.
To run?
No. Yes, all of it. Staying still, and every behavior is consistent with that desire.
No, it isn't. If it is the case that those intentions prescribe a particular course of action, they lead you to act a certain way.
You can fail, Drayce.
Yes, you can. I mean, like, you can fail to. I mean, like, if you have the intention, right, and you might be able to fail in the sense that you have no legs, or something like that. So you
Right.
want you can,
All I'm telling you, Drayce, listen to what I'm saying, is that you have a desire to run and there's a tiger. Can
Yep.
you know whether there's going to be survival?
but can you know just off the basis of that information alone? No.
The reason why is because a myriad of circumstances are compatible with that desire. A myriad.
Yeah, but see, a myriad of circumstances with respect to like, the question of how well you're able to do it, really.
But
That,
because
I understand. Sure,
it
I
is
can
not.
just say, fine, I can just help you out. Let's just say that person has the physical capability of outrunning a tiger.
So,
Okay,
but
let's just
are
say
you
that.
more
I'll grant it.
Are you more likely to get to that end if you have that intention, though? I think that.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, so I think you're making a complete divorce there between.
Not because of the intent. You're not going to understand. If there's a probability there, Snake, it's not because of the intention. But the point is that you and I probably have background knowledge about people wanting to run and then running. Okay, but the point is that if I'm setting up a hypothetical in which all you know, okay, is that a person desires to run, they have the capability of outrunning the tiger.
Yep.
Okay, and there's a tiger. The point is that natural selection doesn't care what you want. It cares about how you behave.
But it does care
Sure.
about the cause, in the sense.
Yeah, because,
But the thing is that my desire not to run, that doesn't mean I'm not going to run.
yes, it does.
But I think.
No, you could just react. You might not even think about it.
Well, see, then that would be like a whole question about what ultimately counts as desire. Because if you instinctually end up running, I would argue that there is a desire on your part, instinctually based.
Yeah,
I don't know what
still
instinctually is doing
But
there.
it's still selecting for whatever. If it's a random cause or an intentional cause, it's still ultimately selecting for that
The
cause.
point is that let's say that what happened was the tiger's there and the person ran. Okay? That we don't know what he desired.
I think you can make a real good guess that he desires to get away.
Use the meanings of the words.
Yeah.
Does the meanings of the words get you to that person wanted to run?
What gets you to the person wanting to run is the relationship between your beliefs and desires and your conduct. Because there is a relationship.
Look, you don't have that background knowledge in this hypothetical. It could be an alien world. It doesn't matter. We
But
all
see,
have background knowledge about the correlation between this desire, right? But I'm saying that it wouldn't. What if it came out to be that person was just there was some other explanation for the running other than the desire to run? Natural selection wouldn't care.
See, again, it certainly does care because of the relationship between those things. If it's the case, Danny, that beliefs and desires dictate courses of action, if there is a relationship there, then since
They
natural
don't dictate shit. They don't dictate shit. Listen, look. Maybe this is a little easier. You take a person who desired to run and runs, and take a person who instinctually, basically dispositionally, like a rock, starts running. What's the observable difference in terms of natural selection?
when you say instinctually in that case, I would count that as a form of desire. So there is no difference.
The difference would be.
Look, I'm just saying. God damn it! Look, I'm just saying that they're running, and it's not because they wanted to run. There's no contradiction.
But the difference would be,
But
what
it
cause
they're
is
not.
heritable.
See, because the whole thing is that, like, you're saying that they could end up running, even if it's the case that they have no desire whatsoever to run, instinctually, consciously, anything. And I don't think that makes sense at all.
Okay, what's the contradiction? Let's go through this again, Drayce. You're not going to point out a contradiction. I promise you, on my life as a philosopher, you're not going to get a contradiction.
All right, I don't want you to die tomorrow like that, Danny. So don't make things.
What's the contradiction between saying my body is moving like as if I wanted to run? What's the contradiction?
The thing there is that you're saying that the body is running as if it wants to run, even though it doesn't.
I didn't say that. I said my body is moving as if I wanted to run.
Right. That's what I just got done saying.
You didn't say that. But
What
sorry, maybe I misheard.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's certainly what I just meant to say, and I'm pretty sure I just said exactly that. But
My bad.
Okay. So anyway, but the thing is that, like, because what I'm suggesting here, like you're suggesting that there's a divorce that's possible between your beliefs and your desires and the actions that you pursue.
The behaviors, yeah. Add to
Yeah, yeah.
action to be something different.
Okay, so I mean, I'm using them synonymously, but let's
Okay,
just use
okay.
your behavior. All right, so, and what I'm saying is that if there is in fact a relationship between these things, between your behavior and your beliefs and your desires, then I do not understand the coherence of suggesting that you're acting in a manner that is really contrary to your beliefs and your desires. You, in order to do that, what you suggested before is you used the word that I did, which was instinctually. But I count that as a form of desire.
Right,
It's
I'm
not
dropping the word because that's not how instinct in philosophy of mind does not involve intentionality. So I'm just dropping the word, right, just to communicate. I put the thing in the chat. My body moved as if I chose to run. I don't see a contradiction. Different cause, same outcome. Thank you, Snake.
Different cause, same outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my body moved as if I chose to run. Even though but you're getting rid of the whole instinctual thing you said, right? So, I mean, would you count the instincts as part of choice in this scenario?
What do you mean by instinct?
What I mean by instinct are certain pre-programmed aspects to the organism that it automatically does, irrespective of whether or not it consciously intends to do it.
Okay, if it's not intentional, I'm fine with saying that it's instinct or reflex, whatever.
Sure. But I'm counting instinct as a form of desire. It's very much a part.
Desire is intentional.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm just asking, if it's instinct, if you're saying instinct, and if you're saying it's desire, I don't mean the same thing. I'm just saying that it's not instinctual by that definition.
In this particular case, you're saying that that we're going with a conscious choice rather than an instinctual action. Now, I'm focusing on that word "chose" to run. I want to
desire.
understand.
So I just look at it. Look, my body moved as if I desired to run.
Okay.
Okay, there's no contradiction.
My body moved as if I desired to run. Okay, and so your question would basically be, we can't tell whether or not the person actually did desire to run?
If all you saw was the running, that underdetermines whether they wanted to run.
Yes, I can agree with that. I think so.
Okay, so then we agree there's no contradiction. So I'm saying that in the case of the tiger example,
well,
I know
I'm sorry. I have to backpedal on that one because it's like I'm actually imagining like the whole scenario we're talking about competing desires, right? So like say you have like some fat lazy person who really doesn't want to run, but because the tiger is there, he runs. Now there's a certain part of him that doesn't want to run. He's fat and lazy. But there's still another part of him that wants to stay alive. And so there is that competing desire there. And it turns out in that situation, the competing desire wins out. He runs.
Okay, I'm not talking about that.
Well, the thing is that it's important, again, because what we're talking about here is whether or not there's a relationship between beliefs and desires and conduct. And if there is such a thing, then natural selection does indirectly act on beliefs and desires. The reason why it does so is because all of those beliefs and desires, since they lead to a particular course of action, supposing that there is a relationship, again, between beliefs, desires, and conduct, since there is this relationship that leads to this particular kind of conduct, natural selection, acting on that conduct, eliminates those beliefs and desires.
Look, if you desire to run, does that mean you're going to run?
Yeah, if I desire to run, I'm running.
Well, you
can't fail.
You could be paralyzed with fear. You could.
Yeah, seriously, come on, Drayce. We've been over this. That there's always if all you know is that you have a desire, there's the possibility of failure or success. You've accepted this, right? So never does it necessitate a behavior.
Right, but the whole thing that we're talking about here, right, is that like when you point out that you could be paralyzed by fear or something like that. This again gets back to the whole question of like your capability to do so. You in your situation said that he is capable. He's a fast runner. He can get away from the tiger. So
that his body is physically possible that the body can move in a way where it can continue and go at a particular velocity. That's all I know.
Yep. Yeah, sure. And so
what does that have to do with intention?
Well, what it has to do with intention, again, like if we're talking about, like the whole question is there a relationship between the beliefs, desires, and the conduct? If there is, then certainly natural selection acts on beliefs and desires because it eliminates the behavior that was produced by those beliefs and desires.
Look, let's take that tiger example, and they desired to run, okay, and they ran, versus the non-intentional case where the body just moves and as if in the exact same way, right? That's to say the legs.
Right. Can I ask what is causing the second situation? What causes you to run in the absence?
Reflex? That doesn't matter.
I mean, like, it sure does.
Well, it doesn't matter because
like,
the cause would still be ultimately selected for. Like, when the environment's selecting phenotype, it's actually selecting the genes.
Yes.
The point, but the point is that if the gene was just there, but there was no phenotype, that's to say there was no running behavior, the person would die. Oh
yeah, if the gene fails somehow, then
Yeah, so I'm saying that what everyone's going to say is going to save that person is getting away from the tiger. Right? It doesn't matter how that happens. Whether it's desire, an instinct, a failure, a success, doesn't matter, right? In that moment, that human being, we've stipulated, survival depends on running away. Yep. And that is what natural selection cares about, not the cause.
But see, the whole thing is, and I think that, again, I just don't think that this point is being appreciated. If it's the case that those beliefs and desires cause that conduct, and like, let's say that beliefs and desires cause the conduct to stay put, okay, and not run.
They die.
They die. Now, that means that everybody who has the beliefs and desires that lead to staying in that one spot and getting eaten by the tiger, they get eliminated from the population.
But that could also be the desire to stand there or to not stand there, right? They could have the desire not to run but be paralyzed, right?
Right, and this gets back to the whole importance
in that
about
case, the desire
capability.
Yeah, in that case, the desire wouldn't be selected for. It would be, whatever the anxiety that caused their desire to be overridden. I
thought that what matters here in terms of survival is just running, nothing else, right? You could have all these other things.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I made my point.
Right. So with respect to, yes, that running is the ultimate thing, but the whole thing is that since there are certain things that produce this running, those are
the necessary conditions, Drayce. Look, if you tell me, if I ask you, Drayce, how do you rob this bank? And you tell me, well, you need to breathe. Of course I need to breathe. Oh, the temperature can't be 1,000,000 degrees Celsius. And also the pressure can't be such that your lungs collapse. You're not telling me shit when you do that, right?
But see, that's totally a lack of analogy because they don't have any causal connection to your actually going about and robbing the fucking bank.
Are you kidding me? Without oxygen, I couldn't do it.
With respect to the whole beliefs and desires thing, there is a direct relationship between.
I'm saying that the oxygen in the air is analogous to the desire. You need?
But it isn't.
Look, do you need oxygen? Gas? Do I need oxygen to rob a bank?
Yep.
Okay. Now, if it's the case that one desire produces the running effect, that I would need that running desire?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, but what determines whether I'm successful in running the bank ultimately will be other factors that we're going to point to, like, not triggering the alarm, getting into the building, right? These sorts of things. Okay. That the sorts of behaviors that are needed there for those sorts of things are the things that are going to be selected for in terms of bank robbing. Okay. Now, in the case of the tiger, right, what's being selected for is going to be the running behavior. Okay. Although you need whatever causes are in place to have the running behavior.
Yeah, that's my point.
Those are called the necessary conditions.
Sure, but since those necessary conditions lead to that particular kind of behavior, the whole point is that since natural selection is eliminating the behavior, it is in turn eliminating everybody who has those particular beliefs and desires.
Snake, am I making sense?
I mean, I think you're both making points. Like,
okay. No, I'm just I'm just surprised.
Yeah, there is you could have there's a necessary conditions of like you need claws and teeth to defend yourself, but you could still fail to defend yourself. But in those conditions where it is successful, those necessary preconditions would be selected for because the behavior succeeded in those conditions.
Here's what I'm saying. Look, here's what I'm saying. I want to talk to Snake for a second. Okay, Snake, here's what I'm saying. Okay, when in the tiger example, what must you have to survive?
Something that causes the running behavior. It could be any cause.
But but when you say something that causes the running behavior, you're highlighting the running behavior, right? You need the running behavior, and we're not a bunch of like magicians here and believe in weird quantum randomness where you're just going to run. Fine, there are going to be causes to it, okay? But there are going to be a myriad of different various causes. It could be all sorts of desires, reflexes, all sorts of things that could potentially cause this thing, okay?
Yeah, but
right?
whatever cause
but
will be selected for ultimately. It could be co-selected along with the other causes that cause the same behavior,
but that's what we call a free rider.
Sure.
Right. Free riders are something like, look, we could just take that out, put it something else, and if it gives in the causal if it still causes the running behavior, it's good because the running behavior is being selected for, not anything else.
Yeah.
So I might be wrong about this, but in terms of the whole free rider thing, though, the way that I normally hear that discussed, the free rider doesn't have anything to do with the selected effect. It's just along for the ride. It doesn't actually. There's nothing that it's relevant to with respect to that. Whereas in the case of the causes of the running, there is a relevance, but in the free rider situation, there isn't one. It's just
look. There could be it could be a causal relation between the trait of interest and the free rider, and there could be a priors, right? There's all these. The point is that I need a heart that pumps blood, right? And there's all sorts of mechanisms and causes. And affects causal interaction between my genes and getting a heart, right? But it doesn't matter what that shit is, as long as I get to the heart, right? And it does, and the rest of my, all things being equal, it doesn't matter.
Well, the whole thing is that I'm saying it does in the sense that, you're saying that all the different, there are many different causes, right, that can lead to the right kind of behavior, but the Snake was saying, though, and what I've been trying to get at.
This is the last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to stop, and I have to go to bed because I've work tomorrow, okay?
Okay.
I'm saying that it's just as important as having oxygen in the air to breathe as an explanation for why the person survived.
But it isn't. And the whole thing is that because, like, you can breathe oxygen and not rob the bank. You can breathe oxygen while you're robbing the bank. But
the tiger person needs oxygen.
But the tiger person does need oxygen. But I mean, like, the whole thing here is like, what is actually producing the running? The air is just background information. The oxygen breathing.
It's also producing the running. No oxygen in the air. You can't run either.
Okay, sure. So I mean, like, if you want to go that route, it still doesn't really help you very much because the whole thing is that you're saying that whatever variety of causes produces this behavior, the behavior is produced, and that's the important thing.
We'll pick it up later. I gotta go. I think looking back, I'm not happy with the way I behaved and the way I explained things tonight. So if I'm not happy with, I'm kind of disappointed in myself intellectually and behaviorally, morally. So I'm kind of upset, but I'll talk to y'all later.
I'll see you.
Okay. Well, Danny, if you watch this later, I just want to say don't be too hard on yourself. I mean, like, we kind of got a little edgy with each other at certain parts of the conversation, but like I said, I don't take that personally, and I thought it was an interesting conversation, so don't be too unhappy with how it went.
Yeah, all my friends yell at me, so...
Yeah, so I have no problem with getting heated during a discussion. Like I said, I mean, I don't take it personally. If somebody has a rib for me that they do mean it in a personal manner, I might interpret that differently, but I'll be honest that in most cases I don't even care about that. So
yeah, agree. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I get the points both of you are making, and I think there just needs to be a synthesis there.
heard that. I'm kind of skeptical about whether or not a synthesis is possible, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
Is there anything further with respect to the question of meta-ethics that you wanted to discuss with me? I know that you said that you wanted to discuss that issue further, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be part of a much longer conversation, though. So, I mean, I think we're good for tonight, but we should definitely.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I think maybe we could just like recap a little bit. So I think it became relevant, like when I was saying that an ought could be replaced by this is the correct thing to do. I think that became relevant again when we were talking about like the identity and dysphoria. Like, so again, I think that could be described in terms of oughts, and then there could become a contradiction, which would cause the dysphoria. So if you're saying I ought to be this other gender, then you could be correct or incorrect. But I think that's what you're actually saying, is that this is the wrong body for me to be in, instead of like, and the contradiction I think that you would be talking about is like, well, or maybe you're not talking about that contradiction, but there would be a contradiction where like, okay, if you think that your life would be better as a helicopter, then you're wrong. Or someone else who has legitimate problems being this one gender, their life would be legitimately better if they had these changes to their body. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get what you're getting at there. My thing was just like not necessarily to discuss whether or not your life would be better or worse, but more a question of like, whether or not gender is a matter of fact. So, if we're taking gender to be a matter of like whether a matter of genetics or morphology and things like that, then it would be a matter of fact as to what category you fall into, irrespective of whether or not you feel differently. And how to interpret your feelings would be one thing. You might say, for example, like, I feel that I should be in a female body, even though morphologically and genetically speaking, you're a male. Mm-hmm. My question as to the legitimacy of that is basically like, what is your basis for feeling that way? What is causing that desire? And that will really, I think that will be an important part in like parsing out whether or not these, the feelings are ultimately legitimate.
Well, that's hard to nail down, and it could simply be, and I don't mean any disrespect, that there is some kind of just random mental thing where it's like, well, I just don't like this body, but that can't be helped. So I think that you can say, well, then you ought to change your body in some way, and that would improve your life.
So, with respect to that, go ahead.
I also wanted to add that I'm losing the point right now. Just go. I'll get it back.
Okay. So, with respect to like the idea that it could be random, so when we're talking about the idea that physiology produces a mental experience, if that's the case, then your mental life is not a random matter. It's ultimately being caused by the physiological activity of your body. And so ultimately, like, if you feel a certain way, if it's true that physiology is what determines the mental life, then ultimately I think that the feeling should be rooted in the physiology somehow, rather than it being a random thing that's just somehow popping into existence ex nihilo out of nowhere. And so I would rather look to the physiology of the body to try to understand why it is that this feeling and emotion is being produced.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the mind is part of the body, so I think that needs to be taken into consideration. I think that in some ways the body is easier to change than fundamental aspects of the mind. But I think you're correct in saying it is a matter of fact that you are X body. Like if you're a pig, it's a matter of fact you're a pig. But I think that's why, like, I think for trans people, I think that's why transition is important, because merely identifying in your mind is not sufficient enough to actualize that identity. You actually have to make a physical change. And I know that could piss off some of the SJWs, whatever. But that is the reason people transition, is because the identity is actually saying, well, there is a contradiction here, because I ought to be this, but I am not. And both are a statement, can be a statement of fact.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah. And I mean, I would just close my thoughts on the issue by saying that if you really want to, if you are a person who's experiencing those kinds of feelings and emotions, that you recognize that you're in a male body, but you feel that you are a female, I think that it is very important to pursue the question of why you feel that way. If it turns out that why you feel that way is based on something legitimate, something that you can point to, then basically you would defeat my position. But and you should, upon that legitimate basis, pursue the transfer of the gender. However, if it's the case that the reasons why you're feeling this way are based on something that is not legitimate, not something legitimate that you can point to, rather what you should be pursuing is not the change of your body, but the change of the way that you feel.
Yeah, I think that is true, and it shouldn't be a decision taken lightly. You should figure out why you feel that way, if it can change, what the best course of action is, and because sometimes it might just be, it could be a phase, or it could be, I mean, especially with younger children mostly, but it could be it was just a suggestion, or it's trendy, or, and I don't mean to trivialize these things, but this is why you need therapy to go through this, to say, okay, is this really what you're feeling, or is there maybe a different source for these feelings? Is this maybe the wrong cure for these feelings, or is this the right cure for these feelings? And there are cases where it would be better for someone to figure out how to live in that body, and there are cases where it would be better for someone to change their body. So yeah, I think I agree there.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, man. Yeah, let's talk more morality soon, and whatever else.